Your curves drive me wild." The towering mountain man bellowed across the dusty street. His voice, deep as a canyon, cut through the afternoon stillness like a bolt of lightning. The graceful young woman, Eliza Jones, was hurrying past with her medicine bundle, and his words silenced every cruel whisper that had been trailing her steps like vultures. The townspeople of Sagebrush Creek saw her as nothing more than the mixed blood girl, the girl destined to lose her father's failing saloon within 2 short weeks. Their mockery was as predictable as the blistering desert sun, a daily ritual of petty cruelty. But this bearded giant, this man who emerged from months in the wilderness, saw something they had missed entirely. He saw strength disguised as vulnerability. He saw a fire in her eyes that could burn down the whole damn town if someone just gave it a little fuel. He saw potential wrapped in worn calico. What he didn't know, what nobody knew, was that hidden beneath the saloon's rotting floorboards lay a secret: documents. Papers that could transform this town laughingstock into its most powerful landowner overnight. But the railroad baron's men were closing in. They would stop at nothing to destroy that evidence, to bury the truth forever. The question was, would her unlikely defender prove to be her salvation? Or would his bold declaration only paint a larger, more dangerous target on her back? The medicine bottle slipped from Eliza Jones's trembling fingers. It hit the dirt with a soft thud as another round of vicious laughter erupted from the porch of the general store. She knelt quickly in the dusty street, her worn calico dress gathering the filth of Sagebrush Creek. Her hands scrambled to retrieve the precious quinine before the glass shattered completely. It was the only thing keeping her father's fever at bay. "Look at her, crawling around like that." Mabel Lawson's voice, sharp and bitter, carried clearly across the street. "Just like her kind always do." Eliza's cheeks burned with a familiar shame. She stood clutching the bottle against her chest, her eyes fixed on the ground. The townspeople made no effort to hide their amusement. It was their favorite afternoon sport. Mrs. Patterson whispered something to her companion, and they both dissolved into fits of giggles, hiding their faces behind their fans. Even young Timothy Fletcher, no older than 10, pointed openly before his mother swatted his hand down, not out of decency, but because pointing was impolite. She had grown accustomed to their cruelty over her 22 years. It was a constant companion, but today felt different. Today, the weight of it all was crushing. The eviction notice in her pocket felt like a hot coal against her skin. It seemed to pulse with each frantic heartbeat, a constant, nagging reminder that she had less than 2 weeks. 2 weeks to save everything her parents had ever built. At the end of the street, the Dusty Rose Saloon stood like a wounded animal waiting to die. Paint peeled from its weathered boards like sunburnt skin. One of the upstairs shutters hung from a single hinge, swinging crookedly in the slight breeze. It was her home. It was all she had left. Inside, her father Samuel lay bedridden. His former strength, the raw power of a railroad worker who had helped lay the very tracks that now threatened them, was gone. It was reduced to labored, rattling breaths and fevered, nonsensical mumblings about the past. Eliza pushed through the saloon doors, trying to force a smile as she approached his bedside. His gaze was glassy, unfocused. "Rest now, Papa," she whispered, her voice cracking. "We'll manage." But they both knew it was a comforting lie, but a lie nonetheless. 3 months of missed payments to Darius Thorne had sealed their fate. The rail baron, a man who collected businesses and souls with the same cold indifference. He owned half the businesses in this town, all acquired through debt, and the Dusty Rose was about to become the latest jewel in his tarnished crown. The saloon's main room felt cavernous and empty. Only two old prospectors nursed their drinks in a dark corner, their conversation a low murmur. The piano sat silent, its keys yellowed with age and neglect. It hadn't been played since her mother passed. Eliza grabbed a rag and began wiping down tables that were already clean. Anything to keep her hands busy. Anything to keep her mind from wandering down the dark path of their impossible situation. Then the doors swung open with such unusual force that they slammed against the inside walls. Every head in the room turned toward the imposing figure filling the doorway. Jackson McCrae stood well over 6 feet tall, his broad shoulders blocking out the afternoon sun, casting a long, imposing shadow across the room. His dark beard was neatly trimmed, a surprising detail for a man who had supposedly spent the last 6 months in the wilderness. His clothes, though simple buckskin and denim, were well-made and clean. He carried himself with a quiet, powerful confidence that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. He wasn't just big, he was present. He commanded the space without saying a word. "Whiskey," he said, his voice a low rumble. He settled onto a bar stool with a surprising grace for such a large man. Eliza poured his drink, acutely aware that the two prospectors in the corner had fallen completely silent. They were watching him. Everyone was. Jackson McCrae was something of a local legend in Sagebrush Creek. A ghost. He would disappear into the mountains for months, sometimes a whole year at a time. He'd return with enough gold dust to live like a king, yet he chose to rent the same modest room above the blacksmith shop, year after year. He was a puzzle nobody could solve. "Much obliged," he said, taking the glass. His voice was cultured, educated. It was the voice of an Eastern gentleman, and it didn't match his rugged mountain man appearance at all. It was the first of many contradictions about him. Over the following days, Jackson became a fixture at the Dusty Rose. He'd sit at the end of the bar, nursing a single glass of whiskey for hours. He spoke little, but his eyes, sharp and intelligent, seemed to take in everything. He saw the worried glances Eliza cast toward her father's room. He saw the way she counted the few coins in the till each night. He saw the fear she tried so hard to hide. When the roof began leaking during a brief violent thunderstorm, he appeared the next morning with tools and a bundle of fresh shingles. He patched it without being asked, his movements efficient and sure. He refused any payment. When the heavy beer barrels needed to be moved from the storeroom, he handled them as if they weighed nothing, lifting them with an ease that made the town's strongest men look like children. Samuel, her father, grew strong enough to sit downstairs for short periods. He would watch Jackson with a curious, searching interest. "You remind me of someone," the old man said one evening, his voice raspy. "Can't place who, but there's something familiar about you, son." Jackson's hand stilled on his glass for just a moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "I get that sometimes," he said, his voice neutral. The mask was back in place, but Eliza had seen it, a crack in the facade, a hint of a story he wasn't telling. Darius Thorne arrived on a Tuesday morning. He didn't walk into the saloon. He descended upon it like a storm cloud in an expensive tailored suit. His two thugs, brutish men with flat noses and dull eyes, stood behind him, blocking the entrance. Thorne let his cold, pale eyes sweep over the empty room, a smirk playing on his thin lips. He looked at the peeling paint, the dusty piano, the worn-out bar. He looked at Eliza as if she were just another broken fixture. "12 days, Miss Jones," he said, his voice smooth as oiled steel. "The deadline is absolute. The railroad requires this land." He didn't even look at Samuel, who was struggling to sit upright in a chair by the cold fireplace. A wise man knows when he's beaten. It's a true shame when stubbornness leads to unnecessary suffering. The threat was clear. Give up now, or he would make their last days a living hell. After Thorne left, the saloon felt smaller, the air thick with defeat. Eliza sank into a chair, the weight of their situation pressing down on her, suffocating her. Samuel reached over, his hand trembling, and patted hers. "Your mother would be proud of you, Eliza," he whispered. "She never backed down from a fight either." Jackson had remained silent throughout the entire exchange, a statue at the end of the bar. But something had shifted in his posture. He hadn't moved a muscle, yet he seemed coiled, ready to strike. His eyes followed Thorne's departure with a cold, burning intensity that made Eliza shiver. It was the look of a predator. She was beginning to wonder what kind of man Jackson McCrae really was, and what thoughts were turning behind that weathered, unreadable face. That night, long after the last customer had gone, as she was locking up the saloon, Eliza noticed Jackson was still sitting at his usual spot. The lamplight cast deep, dancing shadows across his features, making him look less like a man and more like something carved from ancient stone. "Why do you stay here?" she found herself asking, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "A man with your means. You could go anywhere in the world. Why Sagebrush Creek? Why this saloon?" Jackson looked up, and for the first time, his carefully guarded expression slipped. The mask fell away, and she saw a flash of something raw and profound in his eyes, a loneliness so deep it startled her. "Maybe," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm still looking for something worth staying for." The town meeting was a powder keg waiting for a spark. The cramped courthouse buzzed with anticipation as Darius Thorne strode to the front, his polished boots clicking against the wooden floor with the precision of a military drumbeat. Mayor Pike, a man whose spine was made of jelly, scrambled to keep up, his round face already glistening with nervous sweat. Eliza sat in the back row, trying to make herself small. She could feel the whispers surrounding her, sharp as needles. Jackson occupied the seat beside her, a mountain of silent calm. His presence was both a comfort and a spotlight, drawing every eye in the room. Samuel had insisted on attending, despite his weakness. He sat propped up by extra cushions, his thin frame looking frail and lost in the oversized chair. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thorne's voice boomed, commanding instant silence. He was a performer, and this was his stage. "We stand at a crossroads, a glorious moment of progress for our great territory. The railroad expansion will bring unprecedented prosperity to Sagebrush Creek." He paused for effect. "But certain obstacles remain." His pale reptilian eyes found Eliza across the crowded room, and he smiled a predator's smile. "Some property owners refuse to embrace this progress," he continued, his voice dripping with false regret. "They cling to failing, dilapidated businesses that contribute nothing to our community's future." Mabel Lawson, seated in the front row like a loyal disciple, nodded vigorously. "That saloon has been nothing but trouble for years. Time someone said it out loud." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. "The Jones property," Thorne announced, pointing a manicured finger directly at Eliza, "sits directly in the path of our proposed new depot. Without it, the entire project is in jeopardy." He let that sink in, turning the entire town against her with a single sentence. It was her fault their bright future was at risk. The crowd began to mutter, angry glances thrown her way. She saw her father's shoulders slump in defeat, and something inside her chest shattered. The last of her hope crumbled to dust. But then, something else took its place. A cold, hard fury. She stood up slowly, her legs trembling beneath her worn dress. Every eye in the room fixed on her slight frame. The silence stretched, thick and unbearable. "Mr. Thorne is right about one thing," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it carried in the dead quiet. "This is about progress." Jackson's hand found her elbow, his grip firm and steadying. His touch sent a jolt of warmth through her entire body, giving her a strength she didn't know she possessed. "Some of us believe in building something better," she continued, her voice growing stronger, clearer. "Others," she looked directly at Thorne, "believe in tearing down anything that doesn't serve their own selfish purposes." "Big words from a girl who can't pay her bills," Thorne snapped, his composure cracking. "You have nothing. No money, no prospects, and no future in this town." "She has more than you think." Jackson's voice cut through the room like thunder. He rose to his full, imposing height, and the courthouse suddenly felt much, much smaller. His calm demeanor had vanished, replaced by a cold, dangerous anger that made even Darius Thorne take an involuntary step backward. "And what exactly does she have?" Thorne recovered quickly, his businessman's instincts sensing a bluff. "A broken-down saloon? A dying father? The charity of drifters?" He sneered. Jackson didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a fine leather portfolio. The courthouse held its collective breath as he opened it with deliberate, theatrical care. Bank documents emerged first, crisp and official, then property deeds tied with ribbon, then correspondence bearing official government seals. The sheer volume of paperwork was staggering. "She has a partner," Jackson said quietly, his voice dangerously calm. "Someone who believes in her vision for the future." He laid the papers on the podium in front of a sputtering Mayor Pike. The mayor squinted at the documents, his eyes widening in disbelief. His face went as white as a freshly starched shirt. These are from the Denver Territorial Bank," he stammered. "This shows an account balance of $50,000. The courthouse exploded. The sound was a physical shockwave of gasps and shocked whispers. $50,000 was a fortune. It was more money than the entire town saw in a year. Thorne snatched the documents, his eyes scanning them frantically, searching for a flaw, a forgery. His confident expression crumbled with each line he read. His face went from smug to confused to horrified. Jackson McCrae Beaumont, he read aloud, his voice hollow with disbelief. Sole heir to the Beaumont Mining Consortium. Eliza stared at Jackson as if seeing him for the first time. Jackson McCrae Beaumont. The Beaumonts were practically royalty in the territory, a family whose wealth was legendary. The rough mountain man facade hadn't changed, but everything else about him suddenly snapped into focus. The educated speech, the quiet confidence, the way he carried himself. It wasn't arrogance, it was breeding. I can assure you the documents are authentic, Jackson addressed the stunned room, his voice radiating quiet authority. I've seen enough legal papers in my life to recognize them. Miss Jones and I are forming a business partnership. The Dusty Rose Saloon will not be torn down. It will be renovated and expanded into a proper hotel. A centerpiece this town can be proud of. He paused, letting the news settle. Construction begins next week. With what workers? Thorne sputtered, grasping for some semblance of control. I control every labor contract in this town. No one will work for you. I've already hired a crew from Denver, Jackson replied smoothly, not missing a beat. They arrive on the morning train tomorrow. Eliza watched in utter amazement as the very same people who had laughed at her, who had pointed and whispered, now studied her with a newfound hungry respect. The transformation was instant and absolute. Money, it seemed, had the power to change everything. But Jackson wasn't finished, not by a long shot. He turned to face Thorne directly, his eyes like chips of ice. His next words carried the weight of an ironclad certainty. The railroad will still get built, Mr. Thorne, but it will be built on fair terms, with fair compensation for the land, and with fair treatment for every man, woman, and child in this town. Thorne's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. For the first time in years, someone had not only challenged his absolute authority in public, but had decisively, humiliatingly won. Jackson extended his arm to Eliza. She took it without hesitation. Together, they walked through the silent, awestruck courthouse toward the door. Behind them, the whispers began again, but now they carried a very, very different tone. The sound of a world turned upside down. The hammering started at dawn, a symphony of construction. Jackson's crew from Denver worked with a swift, efficient precision that was a marvel to watch. They were not just laborers, they were craftsmen. Their skilled hands began transforming the Dusty Rose from a dying eyesore into a vibrant promise, board by board. Eliza moved among them with a newfound confidence she had never known. Her natural head for numbers, once used for pinching pennies, was now coordinating massive supply orders and managing complex schedules. She felt alive, purposeful. The foundation needs reinforcement here, she said, pointing to the saloon's eastern wall. Winter floods always hit this corner the hardest. We need to sink the pilings deeper. The foreman, a grizzled man named Miller with kind eyes, nodded approvingly. Smart thinking, miss. Most folks don't consider seasonal damage until it's too late. Eliza felt a flush of pride at the simple recognition. For the first time in her life, men, strong, capable men, were listening to her ideas without mockery or dismissal. They respected her. The feeling was intoxicating. Jackson watched from across the bustling construction site, his expression unreadable. He had thrown himself into the project with a surprising, relentless intensity. Despite his immense wealth, he worked alongside the hired crew. His hands, once accustomed to ledger books and fine silverware, now bore fresh calluses from handling rough-hewn lumber and heavy tools. You don't have to do manual labor, you know, Eliza said, handing him a dipper of water during a brief break. You're paying these men well enough. He took the water, his fingers brushing against hers. A spark, unexpected and warm, passed between them. A man should know how to build the things he owns, he said, his eyes holding hers. And besides, I like the work. But their newfound peace was short-lived. Darius Thorne arrived mid-morning, not with threats this time, but with a chilling, predatory smile. He was flanked by two men Eliza didn't recognize, their faces bearing the hard, cold lines of professional intimidators. They were not laborers. They were something else entirely. "Quite the operation you have here, Beaumont," Thorne said, surveying the construction with obvious, bitter displeasure. "I trust all your permits are in order." "Filed with the territorial office yesterday," Jackson answered without looking up from the beam he was measuring. "How thorough," Thorne's smile never reached his eyes. "I've done some research on you, Mr. McCrae Beaumont. A fascinating background. Eastern education. A mining fortune that could buy a small country. Powerful society connections." He paused dramatically, raising his voice to ensure every worker on the site could hear his next words. "Tell me, what does a man of your breeding really want with this dusty frontier life? Is this some kind of adventure story you can tell at your fancy dinner parties back east?" Several workers glanced up from their tasks, their hammers falling silent. Eliza felt a ripple of tension spread through the construction site like electricity before a storm. Thorne was planting a seed of doubt, a poison meant to divide them. "I want what every man wants, Thorne," Jackson said quietly, his voice dangerously low. "A life worth living." "How noble!" Thorne's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Playing at being common folk must be thrilling for someone of your background. But what happens when the game gets boring, Beaumont? When the splinters and the sweat stop being romantic? When real hardship replaces your idealistic notions?" Eliza watched Jackson's jaw tighten, a muscle twitching in his cheek. Something about Thorne's words had struck a nerve, a raw, exposed place she couldn't see. "You think this is a game?" Jackson finally looked up, his eyes dark with a sudden, cold fury. "I think you're a rich boy playing dress-up in the wilderness," Thorne shot back, pressing his advantage. "When things get truly difficult, you'll run back to your comfortable life in Philadelphia. You'll run back to your family's money, and you'll leave these good people to face the consequences of your little frontier fantasy." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Eliza saw the doubt creep into some of the workers' faces. Even Samuel, watching from the saloon porch, shifted uncomfortably. Thorne's poison was working. Jackson set down his hammer with a deliberate, almost unnerving care. He straightened up to his full height and turned to face Thorne. "You want to know why I left my family's money? Why I chose this life?" he asked, his voice deceptively soft. "By all means," Thorne sneered. "Enlighten us." "Because I spent 25 years watching men exactly like you." Jackson's voice grew harder, each word a hammer blow. "Men who destroy everything decent in their relentless pursuit of profit. I watched my own father crush small businesses, ruin good families, just to expand his empire. I saw what money without a conscience can do to communities just like this one." His voice carried across the now silent construction site with a quiet, forceful dignity. "I didn't come here to play at being poor, Thorne. I came here because I was tired of being rich and empty." "Pretty speeches don't change the facts," Thorne retorted, but his voice had lost its edge. He was losing the crowd. He needed a different angle. Just then, Samuel let out a sharp gasp from the porch. He clutched his chest, his face turning a ghastly shade of gray. He slumped sideways in his chair, his eyes rolling back in his head. "Papa!" Eliza screamed, rushing to his side. Her hands shook as she desperately felt for his pulse. It was faint, thready. His skin was clammy and cold. His breathing came in shallow, rattling gasps. "He needs a doctor." Jackson was beside her in an instant, his earlier anger forgotten, replaced by a focused calm. His strong hands lifted Samuel with surprising gentleness, as if he weighed nothing. "The nearest physician is in Cedar Falls," the foreman, Miller, said grimly. "That's 3 hours by wagon, if you push the horses." "He won't survive the trip," Eliza whispered, tears streaming down her face, blurring her vision. "Yes, he will." Jackson's voice was absolute, leaving no room for doubt. "I'll take him to Denver. There's a specialist there, a man my family knows. He can help him." "Denver? That's a 2-day journey. The expense alone—" "Let me worry about that," Jackson said firmly. Thorne watched the entire scene unfold with a look of obvious, cruel satisfaction. He saw his opening, and he took it. Reality has a way of intruding on fairy tales, doesn't it, Miss Jones? He said, his voice laced with mock sympathy. Medical bills, travel costs, lost construction time. How quickly your partner's fortune will disappear. And then where will you be? Jackson ignored him completely, his attention focused entirely on Samuel's labored breathing. Eliza, get his warmest clothes. We leave within the hour. As Jackson carried Samuel toward the stable, the full weight of responsibility settled onto Eliza's shoulders like a physical blow. The construction crew watched her, their faces uncertain, waiting for direction. Thorne's two thugs had moved closer to the building site, their intentions clear and menacing. "What are your orders, miss?" Miller asked, his voice low. Eliza looked at the half-finished hotel, a skeleton of hope. She looked at Thorne's expectant, triumphant face. Then she looked at Jackson, disappearing into the stable with her dying father. Everything she had worked for, everything she had just gained, hung in the balance of this single moment. She took a deep breath. "Keep building," she said, her voice firm, unwavering. "No matter what happens, we finish this project." Thorne's smile was as sharp as a blade. "Brave words, girl. Let's see how brave you feel when you're facing the future alone." The wagon wheels disappeared into a cloud of dust, taking Jackson and Samuel toward an uncertain future in Denver. Eliza stood alone in the middle of the construction site, watching until the last trace of them had vanished beyond the rolling hills. The hammering had stopped. 20 workers stood silently, their eyes on her, waiting for her next command. For a moment, the crushing weight of it all threatened to buckle her knees. Alone. She was completely and utterly alone. "Back to work," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We have a hotel to build." The foreman, Miller, scratched his beard, his expression troubled. He gave a reluctant nod, and the sounds of construction slowly, hesitantly, resumed. But something had changed. The energy, the optimism, was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet, gnawing uncertainty. An uncertainty planted by Thorne, and now watered by Jackson's absence. The next few days were a blur of sleepless nights and grueling work. Eliza threw herself into the project, driving herself and the crew with a desperate energy. But Thorne's campaign of attrition had begun in earnest. A wagon carrying a crucial shipment of milled lumber from Cedar Falls had an accident on the mountain pass. The wagon, the lumber, and the driver were found at the bottom of a ravine. Another critical delay. Then the water in the main well turned foul overnight. Sabotage. They were forced to haul water from the creek, a back-breaking task that cost them precious hours each day. "Someone's poisoning the well, Miss Jones, and I don't just mean with the water," Miller told her privately one evening, his face grim. "My boys are getting pressure from all sides. Thorne's men are in the taverns every night, whispering in their ears, offering them higher wages to work on the railroad depot, spreading rumors that Beaumont has abandoned you." "Can you hold them together?" Eliza asked, her stomach twisting into a knot. "For now," he said, not sounding convinced. "They're loyal. But if that railroad man keeps squeezing, if the money from Denver doesn't arrive soon, some might take the steady work elsewhere. A man has to feed his family." Eliza nodded grimly. Thorne's strategy was becoming brutally clear. He didn't need to attack her directly with thugs and threats. He just had to make everyone else's life difficult, to make her project seem cursed, until they abandoned her cause out of sheer exhaustion and self-preservation. That evening, she climbed the stairs to the saloon's second floor. Her father's empty room felt cavernous, haunted by his absence. The silence pressed in on her ears like deep water. She had never realized how much simple comfort Samuel's steady, breathing presence provided until it was gone. The old wooden floorboards creaked as she paced, her mind racing through calculations that never, ever balanced properly. Food for the crew. Wages. The ever-increasing cost of materials. And the terrifying, unknown cost of medicine for Samuel when, if he returned. The numbers blurred together into an impossible, terrifying equation. Her foot caught on a loose board near the window, and she stumbled. Annoyed, she knelt to examine the damage, running her fingers along the warped, splintered wood. It wasn't just loose. It felt different from the others. The board lifted easily in her hand, revealing a dark, rectangular space beneath. Her heart leaped into her throat. This wasn't accidental damage. This was a hiding place, a secret kept for decades. With trembling fingers, she lowered her hand into the dusty gap. Her fingers brushed against something smooth and rectangular. A book, bound in faded leather, emerged first. It was heavy, solid. Beneath it was a small tin metal box that rattled with hidden contents. Her mother's belongings, hidden away for over 20 years. She sat on the floor, the lamplight casting a golden glow on the room, and opened the book. The diary's pages were yellowed and brittle with age, but the handwriting was perfectly legible, her mother's handwriting. Rose's elegant, flowing script danced across the paper, recording daily events that seemed ordinary at first glance. Washing clothes, cooking meals, serving customers in the saloon. But then, certain entries made Eliza's breath catch in her throat. April 10th. Helped 3 travelers reach the next station safely. The conductors say the route north is clear for now. We must be vigilant. May 2nd. Samuel grows suspicious of my nighttime activities. The lanterns in the window, the late-night visitors. I must be more careful with the signals. The cause is too important. July 18th. Word has finally arrived from my contacts in the East. The Beaumont family has sent word to their associates. Rose Beaumont is officially, legally, dead. My new life as Rose Jones can truly begin. Eliza's hands trembled so violently she could barely hold the book. The truth, so enormous, so world-altering, revealed itself page by page. Her mother, her quiet, gentle mother, had been Rose Beaumont. She had faked her own death. And this saloon. It wasn't just a saloon. It was a station on the Underground Railroad. She opened the tin box. Inside were not jewels or money, but papers. Old folded property deeds, survey maps, and legal correspondence. As she carefully unfolded them, another more recent truth became clear. The deeds showed her mother as the legal owner of not just the saloon plot, but the entire block. And the correspondence detailed with chilling clarity a systematic, multi-year effort by Darius Thorne's father, and now Thorne himself, to erase her mother's legal claim. Convenient clerical errors, lost files, forged signatures. The rail baron had been stealing her inheritance piece by piece for years. A sharp, loud knock at the front door made her jump, nearly screaming. She scrambled to her feet, quickly gathering the diary and the papers, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She shoved them back into the hiding place and replaced the floorboard just as the voice came again. "Miss Jones!" It was Miller, the foreman. His voice was thick with worry. "We got problems downstairs. Big problems." She rushed down the stairs to find 3 of Thorne's men standing in the middle of her saloon. They weren't the usual thugs. These men wore crisp suits and stern expressions. One of them wore a badge that looked official enough to fool most people, though she suspected it was as fake as their manufactured authority. "Building inspection," the leader announced, producing a clipboard covered in official-looking forms. "We've received multiple anonymous complaints about unsafe construction practices. We're here to investigate." "By whom?" Eliza demanded, her voice shaking with rage. "Anonymous complaints," the man said with a cold smile. "Very serious allegations. We have to follow procedure." They moved through the building like a plague of locusts, pointing out imaginary problems, citing nonsensical violations, and scribbling notes designed to intimidate and overwhelm. The foundation was improperly set. The support beams were substandard lumber. The roof pitch was in violation of Territorial Code 7B. It was a farce, but a powerful one. The few remaining construction crew members gathered in the saloon's main room, their faces grim with a weary understanding. This wasn't law enforcement. This was harassment, dressed up in a cheap suit and a tin badge. "I'm afraid I have no choice," the fake inspector announced with false solemnity. "Given the severity of these violations, I'm issuing a stop work order. I'm shutting you down until these issues are corrected and the proper permits are filed." He paused, letting the final blow land. "That could take weeks, maybe months." "You have no authority here," Eliza cried out. "I have territorial backing, miss," the man said, his smile widening. "You want to challenge that in court? Be my guest." Of course, legal proceedings of this nature could take months, maybe years, by which time there won't be anything left to fight for. The threat was brutally clear. Fight them and lose everything to endless legal fees and crippling delays. Submit and lose everything to Thorne's relentless, grinding manipulation. Either way, she lost. After they left, plastering a large red stop work order on her front door, the last of her crew stood around uncertainly. The fight had gone out of them. A few had already started gathering their tools, recognizing the writing on the wall. This was the end of the line. Miller approached her, his face a mask of obvious reluctance and regret. "Miss," he began, his voice low. "My boys, they need steady work. We can't afford to wait for months. If this project's getting shut down—" "Give me until tomorrow morning," Eliza said, her mind racing. "Just until tomorrow, I think. I think I might have a solution." He looked at her, at the desperation and the strange new fire in her eyes, and nodded slowly. "Until morning, miss. But that's all the time we have." Alone again, she stood in the silent, cavernous saloon and looked at the red notice on her door. It was a declaration of war. Thorne thought he had her cornered. He thought she was beaten, but he didn't know about the secret under the floorboards. She went back upstairs and spread her mother's documents across a table, her inheritance of paper and ink. She began to read by the dim, flickering lamplight. Somewhere in these faded pages lay the key, the weapon she needed. Her mother had been smart enough to outwit a wealthy, powerful family and forge a new identity from scratch. Surely she had been smart enough to protect her daughter's inheritance? The answer was here, waiting in faded ink and careful, brilliant planning. Eliza just had to be brave enough to find it, and strong enough to use it. The wagon appeared on the horizon just as the afternoon sun began to dip low, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Eliza's heart soared. It was Jackson. He wasn't alone. Samuel sat beside him on the wagon bench, thinner and paler, but sitting upright. The fever was gone from his eyes, replaced by a clear, steady light. He smiled as he saw her running toward them, a real, genuine smile. "Best doctor's money can buy," Samuel said as Jackson helped him down, his voice stronger than it had been in months. "Your fella here wouldn't accept anything less." Eliza hugged her father tightly, then turned to Jackson. Her eyes filled with a gratitude so profound it left her speechless. He simply nodded, a quiet smile touching his lips. She led them toward the saloon, acutely aware of how much the construction had progressed, despite Thorne's interference. After the fake inspectors had left, she had done something desperate. She had gone to the women of the town, the wives and daughters of the men who had been forced off her job. She had offered them fair wages, food from her dwindling supplies, and a chance to fight back against the man who was slowly strangling their town. To her astonishment, they had come. Her makeshift crew of local women and a few sympathetic townsfolk had worked in secret during evening hours and before dawn, when official eyes weren't watching. They made repairs, reinforced walls, and slowly, defiantly, pushed the project forward. "The workers?" Jackson asked, his eyes scanning the site, noticing the absence of his Denver crew. "Thorne scared most of them off with a fake stop work order," Eliza explained, a hard edge to her voice. "But I found alternatives." Inside the saloon, she had arranged the documents on a large table, the pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. Samuel's face went white as a ghost when he saw his wife's familiar handwriting spread across the wooden surface. "Rose's diary," he whispered, sinking into a chair as if his legs could no longer support him. I thought it was lost in the fire." "What fire?" Eliza asked, confused. But Jackson wasn't looking at the diary. His eyes, trained to read complex legal documents, were scanning the property deeds with a growing, stunned amazement. He quickly grasped their staggering significance. "These deeds predate any claim Thorne might have by 20 years, he said, his voice sharp with excitement. "Your mother owned this entire block. Legally, airtight." "She was Rose Beaumont," Samuel said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of secrets kept for a lifetime. He looked from Eliza to Jackson. "Jackson, she was your father's sister." The revelation hit Jackson like a physical blow. He stared at Samuel, then at Eliza, his mind reeling. He looked back at the documents as if seeing them for the first time. My Aunt Rose, she died when I was 12. The family said she drowned in a boating accident. She faked her death, Samuel explained, the story pouring out of him. To escape an arranged marriage, your grandfather, old Cornelius Beaumont, had planned for her. She couldn't stand the man he'd chosen. She came west, used her inheritance to buy this land, and then he trailed off, his gaze distant. Then she started helping people, escaped slaves, helping them reach freedom through the Underground Railroad. Eliza watched Jackson's face as the impossible family connection sank in. That makes us cousins. Distant cousins, Jackson corrected automatically, his lawyer's training kicking in despite his shock. More importantly, Eliza, it makes you the rightful, sole heir to a piece of property worth far more than anyone ever realized. Samuel's hands, still trembling slightly, opened the diary to a specific bookmarked page. She wrote everything down, every transaction, every legal document she filed, every person she helped guide to freedom. She knew, even back then, that someone would eventually try to steal what she had built. Thorne hasn't just been trying to take the saloon, Eliza said, the pieces clicking into place. He's been systematically trying to erase her, to wipe her very existence from the territorial records. Jackson's words from 2 weeks ago came back to her. She has more than you think. He was right. She had her mother's courage. During his absence, she had discovered reserves of intelligence and resilience she never knew she possessed. Managing the construction, handling Thorne's harassment, uncovering her mother's secrets. Each challenge had forged her into someone new, someone stronger. There's something else, Samuel said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Rose wasn't just helping escape slaves. She was documenting everything. Names, dates, routes, the names of sympathetic conductors and station masters all the way to Canada. If that information fell into the wrong hands, even now, it could destroy dozens of families. Where is it? Jackson asked, his voice urgent. Samuel pointed a shaky finger toward the grand stone fireplace that dominated the far wall of the saloon. There's a loose stone, the third one from the left, on the second row. She built a hiding place behind there, said it would protect the people she helped, even long after she was gone. Jackson moved to the fireplace and carefully worked the stone loose. It came away smoothly, revealing a dark cavity within. Reaching inside, he pulled out a metal box, heavy and wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from moisture. He placed it on the table and opened the lid. Inside were not just letters and maps, but detailed, coded ledgers of the Underground Railroad operations that had been run out of this very room. The historical significance was staggering. This was not just a family story, it was a piece of American history. This proves it, Eliza breathed, her hand tracing the faded ink on a map. This proves the saloon was a legitimate, operational station. Mother wasn't just running a business. She was running a rescue operation. It's more than that, Jackson said, his eyes fixed on one particular document he had carefully unfolded. His breath caught. Eliza, look at this. He handed her a letter. It was written on official territorial stationery, and the signature at the bottom was bold and unmistakable. This letter, Jackson said, his voice filled with awe, is from the territorial governor himself, Governor Crawford. He's thanking Rose for her invaluable service to the cause of human liberty and is promising her and her property the full legal protection of the territorial government. It was signed, dated, and sealed with the official territorial stamp. A smoking gun. The implications were enormous. Rose's work hadn't just been a secret, clandestine operation. It had official recognition and sanction at the highest levels of the territorial government. Any attempt to seize her property wouldn't just be a business dispute, it would be seen as an attack on sanctioned, protected humanitarian efforts. Thorne doesn't know about this, Samuel said, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across his face. He thinks he only has to worry about business records and property deeds. He has no idea what he's truly up against. Eliza felt the final pieces of the puzzle click into place, like a heavy lock finally turning. We don't just prove ownership, she said, looking from Jackson to her father. We prove her legacy. We show this entire town what this place really represents. We tell the whole story, Jackson agreed, his eyes gleaming with a fierce, strategic light. We won't just fight him with legal documents. We'll fight him with the moral authority of your mother's life. They spent the rest of the evening organizing their evidence, laying out the diary, the deeds, the governor's letter, and the secret ledgers. They planned their presentation, their strategy, preparing for what would likely be the most important town meeting in the history of Sagebrush Creek. Outside in the growing darkness, Thorne's men continued their patrols, completely unaware that their cornered, beaten quarry had just discovered an arsenal of weapons far more powerful than money, lies, or intimidation. "Tomorrow," Eliza said as they finished their preparations, her voice ringing with a newfound, unshakable confidence. "Tomorrow changes everything." Darius Thorne entered the courthouse with the theatrical precision of a conquering general. He was flanked by Mayor Pike and, to Eliza's surprise, two stern-faced territorial officials he had clearly summoned from the Capitol. His confident, predatory smile suggested a man who believed he held all the winning cards. He had spent the morning filing additional legal challenges, bringing in outside authority to crush any final pathetic resistance. He was here for the kill. Eliza entered through the back door, carrying a simple leather satchel that seemed to pulse with a hidden, formidable power. Jackson walked beside her, his presence a steady, reassuring mountain of calm. Samuel followed, moving slowly but with his dignity and health fully restored. The crowd, which had gathered expecting to witness a final public execution, fell silent as the trio made their way to the front of the room. The air crackled with tension. "This is highly irregular," Mayor Pike stammered, already mopping sweat from his flustered brow. "Calling meetings without proper notice, bringing in outside agitators." He gestured vaguely toward Samuel and Jackson. "I'm calling this meeting as a property owner and a citizen of this town," Eliza said, her voice clear and strong, carrying to the back rows with ease. "And I have evidence that concerns the past, present, and future of every single person in this room." Thorne let out a laugh that was as sharp as breaking glass. "More desperate delays and childish theatrics. It's over, girl. The territorial officials I have brought here today have the final authority to settle this matter. Permanently." One of the officials, a stern man with steel-gray hair and cold eyes, nodded gravely. "We have reviewed Mr. Thorne's documentation. The railroad expansion serves vital territorial interests. Individual property disputes cannot be allowed to obstruct progress." It was a death sentence delivered with bureaucratic indifference. Eliza opened her satchel and withdrew the faded leather diary. She handled it not like a book, but like a sacred text. "Before you make your final judgments," she said, addressing the official directly, "you should know the complete and true history of this property." "We know enough," Thorne interrupted impatiently. "It's a failing saloon owned by a family of deadbeats who can't pay their debts. The territorial government has no interest in subsidizing failure." "Then perhaps," Eliza said, her eyes locking with his, "you'll be interested in subsidizing heroism." The word hung in the air like a challenge, a ringing bell. Before anyone could react, Eliza opened the diary to a marked page and began to read. Her voice, clear and unwavering, filled every corner of the silent courthouse. "April 15th, 1863, helped 7 travelers, a family of 4 and 3 brave men, reach the northern station safely. The conductors report increased patrols along the river, but our signals remain secure. Samuel grows more suspicious of my nighttime activities, but the cause demands sacrifice. Freedom demands sacrifice." Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. This was not what they had expected. Thorne's confident smirk began to waver. The territorial official's stern expression had shifted, replaced by one of keen, focused interest. "Are you claiming this property was an official station on the Underground Railroad?" the official asked, his voice sharp. "I'm not just claiming it," Eliza said. Then she nodded to her father. With trembling, triumphant hands, Samuel produced the governor's letter and handed it to the official. "We have proof, official recognition, and a promise of permanent protection, signed by Territorial Governor Crawford himself." The official took the document and examined it with the precision of a master jeweler. His legal training was evident in the way he studied the seal, the signature, the watermark on the paper. His face grew grave as the full seismic implications became clear. This letter, he announced to the stun room, grants permanent, irrevocable territorial protection to this property and its operations. It is a legally binding order from the highest office in the territory. Thorne's face had gone as white as parchment. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut. That document is decades old. It's a historical relic. It has no bearing on current railroad development. On the contrary, Mr. Thorne, the official replied, his voice as cold as a winter morning, territorial protection is permanent unless specifically revoked by a subsequent gubernatorial order. There is no record of such an order. This property has legal immunity from seizure for any purpose, including your railroad. Eliza felt the power in the room shift, a tangible physical presence. It was like a great tide turning. The same people who had mocked her and whispered about her just weeks earlier now stared at her with a growing, profound respect, with awe. She wasn't just fighting for a failing business. She was protecting a monument to courage and sacrifice. Furthermore, she continued, her voice ringing with the force of absolute truth as she produced the property deeds, my mother's legal ownership of this entire city block was systematically and illegally erased from the territorial records through fraudulent means. Jackson stepped forward and handed a thick stack of additional documents to the stunned official. We have correspondence proving deliberate alteration of legal filings. We have bank records showing bribery of territorial clerks. And we have a sworn affidavit detailing a conspiracy led by Mr. Thorne and his late father to defraud a legally protected property owner. The official's expression grew thunderous as he reviewed the damning evidence. He looked up from the papers, his eyes boring into Thorne. Mr. Thorne, these are extremely serious allegations of territorial fraud, a federal crime. Lies, fabrications, Thorne sputtered, but his voice was thin, his usual authority completely evaporated. He was cornered, trapped. It's a desperate attempt to avoid legitimate debt collection. The documents appear authentic, Mr. Thorne, the official said grimly, and the affidavit is sworn. This matter requires an immediate and thorough investigation by the Territorial Attorney General's office. Eliza stood before the silent, captivated crowd that had once laughed at her, but now she commanded their complete and undivided attention. She was no longer the outcast. She was their champion. This property will be developed, she announced, her voice filled with vision and hope. But it will be developed to honor its incredible history and to serve this community's needs, not the greed of one man. She outlined her vision for the Rose Heritage Hotel, a grand establishment that would preserve the original saloon as a historical museum, a protected underground railroad station, while providing jobs, prosperity, and a source of pride for all of Sagebrush Creek. The railroad would still come, but it would come on their terms, as partners, not as conquerors. Thorne, defeated and exposed, was already stumbling toward the exit. Mayor Pike, his face a mess of panic and sweat, was calculating how quickly he could distance himself from the collapsing conspiracy. In the quiet aftermath, Jackson found Eliza's hand and squeezed it gently. Their partnership, forged in the crucible of the last few weeks, had become something deeper, something more profound. Respect had grown into admiration. Admiration had blossomed into a love built on equality, trust, and shared courage. As the courthouse emptied, people approached Eliza one by one. They came with shame-faced apologies, with applications for jobs at her new hotel, and with heartfelt expressions of support. The woman they had dismissed as a worthless outcast now controlled their town's economic future. But she wielded that newfound power with the same quiet grace and dignity she had shown when she was facing their persecution. 6 months later, the Rose Heritage Hotel opened to territorial acclaim. The beautifully restored building was a masterpiece, a perfect blend of history and progress. It honored its secret past as a beacon of freedom while promising a bright, prosperous future for the town it had saved. Eliza and Jackson's partnership had become a marriage, celebrated not just by the town of Sagebrush Creek, but by the entire territory. Their story had become a legend. In the hotel's grand lobby, a polished bronze plaque told the story of Rose Bowman Jones, Her courage, her sacrifice, and her daughter's fierce determination to claim a legacy written not in gold or land, but in dignity and justice for all. If you believe that courage can change the world and that good people will always find a way to win, then do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. We've got a lot more stories like this one coming your way.